Hello, welcome to the second workshop, which is focusing on writing learning outcomes. Writing learning outcomes. Like we said earlier, learning outcomes directs what we do in a class. They direct your learning activity. They direct content. They direct everything you do in the class. So your learning outcomes basically is your map in a class. So whether you are designing for online environment or face-to-face environment or blended learning outcomes are very critical. If you don't set them up well or you don't write them up well, your activities are going to be misguided and your content will be misguided, or they may not be leading to the right destination. So that is learning outcomes, very critical. They are actually the bedrock of everything in a typical course or module. They define the purpose and the scope of the whole module or the course. Okay. They provide the mechanisms through which activities are generated, and they also ensure that only content is included that is strictly relevant to the activities. So you can see learning outcomes lead to activities and activities lead to content, not the other way around. So I've done some reviews of blueprints, and I've seen colleagues who have gone straight to design content, and I'm asking, based on which outcome, based on which activities have you gone to design outcomes? So really, you have put the cart before the horse, because your outcomes should be your direction, should be directing everything you do. If there are no outcomes, what is the point in teaching? What is the point in learning? Okay, so these are the critical reasons why learning outcomes are very important. So how do you write it out, the actual process? Okay, now for each module, okay, you can create between 8 to 10 learning outcomes for the module. In some cases it's less than that. Okay, if you look at your blueprints, we've tried, in the course overview, we've tried to identify some learning outcomes which we want you to keep at that level. The step 2 is you have to draft your assessment, which again we said that we will come back to the assessment strategy based on other discussions that we are going to have. So we will come back to the assessment strategy. But if you are designing this yourself or for your department, then another thing that follows your learning outcomes is to think about how do you assess students in achieving these outcomes. Because you see, when we set up assessment, we try to match that assessment with the outcomes. The reason is very simple. You cannot assess students based on something that you haven't taught them. Okay, I hope it makes sense. You assess them based on what they are able to attain. So if the assessment and the learning outcomes are not talking to each other, then students will say, well, you didn't teach us this and you set up this for us to be assessed. So there's some kind of relationship between learning outcomes and assessment strategy. We want to advise that you focus on using very good active verbs, okay, very active verbs to design your learning outcomes from week 1 to week 5. I am proposing that you shouldn't have more than 5 lessons in a week, I mean per topic. So you can see that every week has a topic, and each of those topics are divided into various lessons. I think 5 lessons is fine. And do not forget that every week has a learning outcome. I'll show you some kind of example very soon. You see that every week has a learning outcome, and then every lesson have a learning outcome. So these two things should be talking to each other. So your lesson outcomes should be dovetailing into your learning outcomes for the unit or for the week. And then all the weekly learning outcomes are also dovetailing into the module outcome. You can see, so there is a chain of interaction between lesson outcomes or unit outcomes to weekly outcomes and to module outcomes. Okay, so that is very important. Now, if we're talking about the 5 lessons in a unit or in a week for a topic, we want to follow some consistency in designing learning outcomes. So for lesson 1, use explain. Use the active verb explain. So your activities that will be designed would be tailored towards explanation. So you ask students to explain the meaning of this and that and that and that. So explanation. So that should be the focus of the learning outcome. The second one is to identify. So ask students to identify this from this. Okay, it could be multiple choice questions where you ask them to identify the right answer or the wrong answer or whatever. Okay, then in lesson 3 we want you to use examine. Okay, they should examine the nature of something, the nature of some kind of concept, the nature of some kind of process. And fourth, they should analyze, bringing out the detail, the differences. Okay, analysis, some kind of analytical work. You remember we talk about Bloom's taxonomy, where we talk about the fact that students have to analyze, very important. And the 5th lesson should be using evaluate, because you are getting close to the end of your week. So the activities that you are going to set up in your 5th lesson should not be talking about explanation, should not be talking about identifying, should be talking about evaluation. How do they evaluate? Because students can think through processes and say, well, if this is like this, then that is going to be the end result. So some kind of evaluation work. Then also, we advise you to set up end of week task for students. Now, in an online environment, because the teacher is not always there, we want to engage students through and through. If you leave students for a few days without any activity, they get back lost in the system. So usually we design end of week activity, and that you can use 2 active verbs. Either you are asking them to apply everything that has been learned in the week, or you are asking them to reflect. I'm sure we all know that reflection is a very important aspect of learning. Okay, students should reflect. Okay, for instance, they should reflect between the political environment in country A and country B. What are the differences? Some kind of reflection. And in a reflective practice, do not forget that reflection is individualistic. And that is where you encourage students to come up with their own opinion about things. I think over time, what we normally do in class is put all students in one box. But in a reflective practice, students come out with their own opinion, their own understanding, their own analysis. And that is acceptable. You are trying to develop students that can think individually for themselves, have their own opinion, begin to see things in a different way. And that is where the dynamism comes in learning. So end of week activities should use apply and reflect. And if all of us can go by this structure, we're going to have some standardization across all the modules we are developing, and that, I think, will be very perfect for all of us. There is an activity here, a quiz activity, that is just to guide how to write learning outcomes. It's a yes or no type of question or answers, and the right answers are provided. Go through one by one and see the differences in writing very good learning outcomes. Thank you very much.